He had everything: money, power, influence. But nothing could have prepared Logan for what he saw that afternoon on the crowded sidewalk. A beggar, thin as bones, holding the hands of two little girls with eyes full of hunger. At first, he kept walking, but then he froze. Because that woman wasn't just another face lost in the city's chaos. She was Olivia, the girl he once loved and never forgot. Most people expect millionaires to look down on the broken, but Logan did the unthinkable. He didn't just stop. He fell to his knees. Right there, in front of strangers, in a designer suit and polished shoes, she dropped to the ground like a man who just saw a ghost from his past. Because this wasn't just any life story. This was a real story that would shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew about success, love, and redemption. This isn't about pity. It's about presence. And what happens when the richest man in the room meets the one woman who once made him feel like he mattered long before the world knew his name. This isn't fiction. It's a touching real story of second chances, deep wounds, and a love strong enough to survive even the darkest streets. And if you think you've seen a surprising story before, wait until you see what he does next. Logan Bennett had built his empire from scratch. To the world, he was the image of success, a symbol of wealth, discipline, and sharp instinct. But beneath the surface, he carried the echo of a touching real story he had never told anyone. A memory of a childhood love that never faded. That day, when he spotted a woman on the sidewalk, holding cardboard in two little girls' hands, his heart froze. It wasn't just any stranger, it was Olivia Carter, the girl who once made his summers unforgettable. People talk about stories about people as if they're far removed from our daily lives. But what Logan saw that day reminded him that real-life stories don't ask for permission to unfold, they just do. He parked his luxury car and stepped out, not caring about the curious stares. Olivia was thin, trembling, and her eyes had that distant look of someone who stopped believing in miracles. Yet when their eyes met, something shifted. A spark of a life story that had never been properly written ignited again. He didn't speak with arrogance or pity. "Come with me," he said gently, his voice steady. Olivia hesitated, but the look in his eyes wasn't one of superiority, it was of recognition. This was a man who remembered the little girl who used to draw flowers in her notebook and say she wanted to open a bookstore one day. She had inspired his first dreams of love and family history, and now she was living a moving story that felt unfair and too raw to accept. Life doesn't send invitations, it throws you into chapters you didn't choose. One of the most impressive stories of our time is not in headlines or films, it's hidden in these silent reunions. Olivia clutched her daughter's hands. "Why?" she asked him, voice shaking. "Because I remember who you are," he said. That's the thing about real stories sometimes. It takes a surprising story to remind us we're still worthy of being remembered. She finally agreed, reluctantly, and stepped into his black SUV. The streets they passed no longer felt as cold. Inside his mansion, silence fell. Olivia kept her gaze low, clutching her daughters close. Logan didn't press her with questions or expectations. Instead, he brought blankets, food, and a warm bed. That's when the real healing begins, not with grand gestures, but with basic dignity. People think inspirational story means heroics, but sometimes it's just giving someone the right to feel human again. That night, they all slept under the same roof, but in completely different worlds. What touched Logan the most wasn't Olivia's condition, it was her pride. Even with nothing, she carried herself with a silent strength. A story with a moral was unfolding in front of him. Even those who fall the hardest can rise with grace. He knew her journey wasn't over, it was just buried under layers of pain, rejection, and time. And deep down, Logan felt a responsibility, not as a savior, but as someone who'd once known her laugh. That laugh that now felt like a forgotten dream. For Olivia, it was like stepping into a fiction that didn't belong to her. Her daughters were safe, warm, but her own heart remained frozen. She felt unworthy of comfort, of kindness, of being seen again. That's what tough life stories do. They make you forget who you were before the storm. But Logan's presence was constant, not demanding. He treated her not as a project, but as a person. Slowly, the cracks of trust began to show. And while the house was filled with luxury, it was the quiet gestures that meant the most. A cup of tea placed gently on the table. A storybook left open for the twins. Olivia was starting to breathe again. This wasn't just a love story, it was a personal overcoming in progress. She hadn't asked for help, but sometimes the most touching stories begin when someone sees your pain before you speak. What Olivia didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. Inside Logan's mansion, Olivia felt like a stranger in a fairy tale she didn't belong to. Marble floors, golden light fixtures, and soft blankets for her daughter sit was all too much. Her hands trembled as she tucked them into bed, her mind battling between relief and guilt. This wasn't her world, and deep down, she believed she didn't deserve it. That's what life does sometimes, Sid convinces us we're only worthy of struggle. But real-life histories have a funny way of rewriting themselves when least expected. Logan, observant but patient, didn't push. He knew this wasn't about charity. It was about restoring someone's sense of worth. In the world of inspiring story, true impact happens when you give without expecting applause. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. Warm food, fresh clothes, a quiet room just for her. These weren't grand gestures, but real ones. And in stories about people, it's the real gestures that matter most. Olivia stared at herself in the bathroom mirror that night, her reflection barely recognizable, not from dirt or fatigue, but from the disbelief that someone still saw value in her. A touching real story was forming, not through dramatic rescues, but in the silence between words. She hadn't smiled in weeks. Yet, as she heard her daughters giggling in the next room, something inside softened. That's the first step in every motivational story, remembering what hope feels like. Shame is a heavy coat, and Olivia wore it like armor. Even in comfort, she felt exposed. Every bite of warm food reminded her of nights spent scavenging for scrap. Every soft bed triggered memories of cold concrete. She didn't want to be a burden, especially not to someone like Logan. But real story doesn't care about pride, it cares about survival. And Olivia was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't surviving anymore. She was starting to live. Logan left a small note on her nightstand. "You don't owe me anything. Just rest." It was more powerful than any speech. These little acts were not just kind, they were healing. In many real-life histories, people confuse kindness with weakness. But the strongest thing you can do is offer grace to someone who feels invisible. Olivia wasn't used to that, and that unfamiliar warmth began melting walls she had built for years. When you've lost everything, even kindness feels suspicious. Olivia battled internal questions. Why him? Why now? Why me? But these aren't just her questions. Anyone who's faced rejection knows that doubt lingers longer than hunger. This wasn't just a touching story's moment, it was an emotional reset. Logan didn't ask for her gratitude. He simply existed, quietly, in her corner, like a background character turning into the unexpected hero of a love story. She couldn't say thank you, not yet. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because her voice still trembled with disbelief. Her daughters clung to her, peaceful, dreaming. Olivia watched them sleep and whispered a silent promise. She'd fight her way back for them. That's what makes life stories powerful, not the tragedies, but the turning points. She didn't know how, but she knew why. And that why was already stronger than she realized. Something had shifted. Not loud, not obvious, but real. The kind of change that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Olivia still doubted herself, but she no longer doubted that change was possible. And when possibility enters the room, everything else rearranges itself. Her past still followed her, but now, it wasn't the only thing defining her. And that realization would soon lead to a conversation she had avoided for too long. The next morning, Olivia sat at the edge of the grand bed, twisting her fingers nervously. Logan brought coffee, no questions, just presence. But eventually, silence demands honesty. And so, with eyes cast down and voice steady, she told him everything. About Jake, about the pregnancy, about how her true story began to fall apart the moment she needed support the most. This wasn't just a confession, it was the raw heart of a moving story. Jake had promised forever, but forever lasted until responsibility showed up. When Olivia discovered she was pregnant with twins, he vanished. No calls, no explanations, just absence. She lost her job soon after, unable to keep up with long shifts and constant fatigue. And just like that, her world unraveled. It wasn't a story with a moral yet, it was just pain. But pain, when shared, starts to transform. Logan didn't interrupt. He listened not as a businessman, not as a savior, but as someone who had once loved her laughter. He understood that some wounds aren't meant to be fixed, they're meant to be honored. That's what real story teaches us. You don't jump in to rescue, you stand beside. His silence said, "I see you," louder than any words could. And for Olivia, that was more healing than pity. Olivia spoke of nights spent in shelters, of begging not for herself, but for her daughters. She talked about the shame of asking strangers for diapers, of being ignored by people who once smiled at her. Her story wasn't unique, and yet every detail made it uniquely heartbreaking. These touching stories are all around us, we just don't see them, unless they wear a suit or come with a microphone. Logan saw it though. He saw her. In many life stories, people don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they were strong for too long. Olivia had carried her girls, her guilt, and her grief without complaint. That kind of strength often goes unnoticed. But not this time. Logan's gaze didn't shift. He simply said, "You don't ever have to walk through this alone again." Simple words. But in the world of motivational story, simplicity is power. He told her about his own losses, about the mother who left, the father who worked himself into an early grave. Logan wasn't just listening, he was relating. That's when connection becomes transformation. Olivia realized they were both carrying versions of pain, just dressed differently. In the realm of stories about people, we're far more alike than we ever assume. And in that realization, trust began to bloom. "You don't owe me your past," Logan said, "but I want to be part of your future." That moment lingered in the air like sunlight after a storm. Olivia felt something shift, like an anchor lifting from her chest. Not all real-life histories have happy endings, but they can have powerful new chapters. Logan wasn't writing her story, he was giving her the pen back. And sometimes, that's all a person needs. For the first time in years, Olivia allowed herself to believe that maybe the worst was behind her. And maybe, just maybe, there was more than survival waiting ahead. She looked at her daughter safe, fed, smiling. Then she looked at Logan. She didn't say it, but something in her eyes whispered, "Thank you." And though her wounds were still fresh, the idea of rebuilding didn't seem impossible anymore, especially with what he'd suggest next. Logan believed in second chances, but not the kind that fall from the sky, the kind that are built, step by step, with courage. One morning, over breakfast, he made a simple but life-changing suggestion. "What if you went back to school?" Olivia blinked. The question felt absurd. She was a homeless single mom. Who was she to dream again? But Logan wasn't offering fantasy. He was planting the seed of a real-life story, waiting to be rewritten. At first, she laughed nervously. "School now?" Her voice held disbelief, almost sarcasm. But deep down, it stirred something. An echo of a dream she'd buried beneath diapers and disappointments. Logan spoke softly. "You're not starting from zero. You're starting with purpose." That's what makes a motivational story so different. It doesn't begin with resources. It begins with belief. And belief, when offered by someone else, can become contagious. He handed her a brochure. Business and entrepreneurship. Evening classes. Flexible hours. Logan had already spoken to the director, anonymously covered the fees, and arranged a counselor for support. "No pressure," he said, "just possibility." Olivia held the papers like they might burn. She didn't know it yet, but she was holding the beginning of a touching real story. The kind that turns people's lives around and inspires others to do the same. For days, she wrestled with fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not belonging. These fears live rent-free in the minds of so many, especially those who've been knocked down. But what separates inspiring story from just surviving is the decision to act despite the fear. Logan didn't push, simply waited. And finally, one evening, Olivia whispered, "Okay, I'll try." That was the moment her life story began to shift. Classes started the following week. Olivia showed up in second-hand clothes, with trembling hands but determined eyes. She sat in the back, quiet but attentive. The first time she answered a question, her voice cracked, but her answer was correct. That's how moving story starts. Not with applause, but with a whisper that dares to speak again. Every page she read, every note she took, was a small rebellion against the version of herself that once gave up. It wasn't easy. There were nights she cried from exhaustion. Mornings when the twins clung to her legs, not understanding why mommy had to leave. But she kept going. Because now, she wasn't just learning business, she was learning to believe in herself. And belief is the fuel behind every true story of transformation. Logan watched quietly from a distance, letting her shine. Because real support empowers without controlling. Her classmates noticed. "You always ask the best questions," one of them said. Olivia smiled genuinely, maybe for the first time in years. That's what stories about people are made of. Small victories, stacked over time, until you realize you've become someone new. She wasn't just taking notes anymore. She was dreaming up ideas, writing plans, thinking ahead. The woman who once begged for diapers was now discussing startup strategies. And yet, even as she blossomed, part of her still doubted. Could this all be real? Could someone like her, with a past like hers, truly rise again? But that's the twist in every surprising story. Doubt is loud, but growth is louder. Olivia was changing. And whether she admitted it or not, the world around her was responding. Including Logan, who was about to open another door she never expected. Opportunity doesn't always knock, it sometimes shows up in the form of an awkward office chair and a name badge. Logan approached Olivia one afternoon, papers in hand and a hopeful smile. "There's an opening for a project assistant in my company," he said. "You'd be perfect for it." Olivia froze. Her inner voice screamed, "You're not ready." But the quiet voice of her growing confidence whispered, "Why not?" And so, another chapter in her real-life story began. The first day was terrifying. Surrounded by professionals, Olivia felt like a fraud. But what people often forget is that every impressive story starts with someone pretending to be brave. She showed up early, took notes obsessively, and asked questions when no one else dared. Logan never hovered, he trusted her. That trust became a quiet motivator. She didn't just want to succeed, she wanted to make him proud. At first, her tasks were simple. Organize files, update calendars, take meeting notes. But with each completed task, her confidence grew. It wasn't just work, it was healing. She was proving to herself that she could contribute, build, lead. That's the magic of a touching real story. It's not in the grand gestures, but in the small wins that stack up until you look back and realize you're no longer who you were. Her coworkers noticed too. "You're sharp," one said. "You think fast," another added. Compliments felt strange at first, but slowly they stopped feeling undeserved. Olivia was transforming, and not just professionally. She was learning to walk taller, speak with clarity, and trust her instincts. Every real story of personal overcoming begins when someone stops apologizing for showing up fully. And Olivia was finally showing up for herself. Logan remained her quiet cheerleader, watching from a distance. He knew this part of her journey had to be hers alone. That's what makes stories about people so powerful, when one person plants the seed, but another chooses to grow. Olivia began suggesting improvements in team meetings, and even led her first small project. The girl who once felt invisible was now being heard. And not just heard, respected. She started journaling again, something she hadn't done since her teenage years. Pages filled with ideas, reflections, and hopes for the future. This was no longer survival, this was vision. In life histories that inspire, you'll always find a moment when the main character stops reacting and starts creating. Olivia was stepping into that moment, fully aware of how far she'd come. And the best part? She wasn't done yet. Even her daughters noticed the change. "Mommy looks happy again," one whispered during dinner. Olivia smiled, fighting back tears. This wasn't just a career shift, it was a life shift. A moving story in motion. She wasn't just building a new path, she was becoming the kind of woman she'd always wanted her daughters to see. Strong, stable, self-led. Logan had opened the door, but Olivia had walked through it. Still, deep inside, a new emotion began to stir. Gratitude. Yes, but also something more complex. Something warmer. Something tender. Her heart, once guarded like a fortress, was beginning to trust again. And while she focused on spreadsheets and team updates, a different kind of growth was blooming quietly in the background, one she never dared to hope for. Emotions don't follow schedules. They creep in between moments, like when Logan walked Olivia to her car after work, and neither wanted to say goodbye. Or when they laughed too long over burnt pancakes on a Saturday morning. These weren't dramatic scenes from a romance novel. They were the quiet, unnoticed beginnings of a real story. One built not on grand declarations, but on consistency, safety, and mutual respect. Logan never rushed her. He didn't flirt recklessly or try to impress with money. Instead, he listened, remembered, supported. He knew what a touching story's moment really looked like. It's in remembering how someone takes their coffee or the way they brush hair from their face when nervous. Olivia felt it too. It scared her. Because love story didn't feel sapphonate after everything she'd survived. But love isn't about safety, it's about presence. And presence, when consistent, builds trust. They began spending more time together outside of work-family dinners. Long walks, movie nights where her daughters fell asleep between them on the couch. It felt natural. A family history forming itself in real time. She still held back, but her heart was no longer locked shut, just slightly ajar. One evening, Logan took her to a local library. "You always talked about owning a bookstore," he reminded her. That one sentence brought tears to her eyes. Not because of the dream, but because someone remembered it. That's when a story with Amaryl takes root, when a person makes you feel visible in ways even you forgot. Olivia didn't say much that night, but something inside her softened again. Her daughters adored him. "Can Mr. Logan come with us to the park?" they'd ask without hesitation. That innocent love carried its own kind of pressure. Olivia wasn't just protecting her heart, she was protecting theirs. And yet, the way Logan looked at them, as if they were already his, it made her believe in surprising story again. The kind that doesn't follow logic but feels undeniably right. Still, they avoided labels. No confessions, no pressure. Just moments. That's how the most touching real story begins, not with lightning, but with slow-burning warmth. Olivia began to crave his presence, not out of need, but connection. That distinction mattered, because this wasn't about being saved, it was about being seen. And for the first time, love didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a return. Their conversations deepened. They spoke about fear, failure, forgiveness. Logan shared his own past, this mother's abandonment, the weight of success, the emptiness that money couldn't fill. Olivia listened, sometimes silently, sometimes with tears. Their life stories, though different, danced around similar themes: loss, resilience, rebuilding. And in those moments, they weren't just lovers in the making, they were mirrors. But just as emotions began to settle into something beautiful, a shadow lingered. Olivia still carried a past that hadn't been fully faced. And Logan, he had a truth of his own he'd been meaning to uncover. One that could either free Olivia completely or haunt her all over again. Logan knew that some ghosts don't disappear until you look them in the eye. Quietly, he began investigating Jake, the man who vanished from Olivia's life like a bad dream, not out of jealousy, but closure. In many real-life stories, healing only happens when truth replaces memory. What he found wasn't shocking, but it was disappointing. Jake hadn't changed. He was still running from everything that required courage. He arranged to meet him, calm, composed, but firm. Jake didn't deny what he did. "I never wanted kids," he said coldly. Logan didn't argue, he just listened. This was more than a confrontation. It was a story with Amaryl unfolding. Some people disappear not because life is hard, but because they refuse to grow. Logan left with no anger, only clarity. And with that clarity, He knew Olivia deserved the full truth. When he told Olivia, her reaction wasn't rage, it was grief, a deep, hollow grief that had been trapped for too long. She didn't cry for Jake. She cried for the girl who believed in him, the girl who hoped he'd change. That's the most intense part of touching stories. They reveal how much we mourn our old selves. Olivia sat in silence for a long time, then whispered, "I needed to hear that." The next step had to be hers. So she reached out, asking to meet Jake, not for reconciliation but for closure. They met at a local diner, neutral ground. She brought no accusations, only truth. "You hurt me," she said, "but I forgive you. Not for you, for me." That's a powerful moment in any life story, when forgiveness becomes freedom. Jake shrugged, unmoved. But Olivia walked out lighter. Closure isn't about changing others. It's about reclaiming your peace. Olivia didn't expect apologies. She didn't need them. What she needed was to hear her own voice say, "I survived you." That kind of strength turns a moving story into a motivational story. She returned home not broken but whole. And Logan was there, arms open, saying nothing because he knew words weren't needed. Her daughters never asked about Jake again. They had a new definition of father figure now, one that showed up, one that listened. Olivia didn't explain, she didn't have to. Children feel stories without hearing them, and they knew their mom was stronger than ever. That's what impressive story is really about. Not who hurt you, but how you healed. Olivia wasn't a victim anymore. She was a leader. In quiet moments, she replayed the past, how far she'd come, how much she'd overcome. The shame that once wrapped around her like chains was gone, replaced by dignity, replaced by choice. Her true story wasn't perfect, but it was hers that made it powerful. And as she looked toward the future, she realized something. She didn't have to look back anymore, unless it was to remind herself how far she'd climbed. Still, as one chapter closed, another one begged to be opened. Logan's love had been steady, patient, but Olivia's heart, though healing, still hesitated. Was she ready to give it fully? That question lingered, waiting for the right moment to be answered. Motherhood had always been Olivia's anchor, but now it became her compass. Each morning started not with dread, but with purpose. Packing school lunches, checking homework, braiding hair, these weren't chores. They were sacred rituals in her life story. The girls giggled more, asked deeper questions, and began drawing pictures of mommy at work. That's when a touching real story becomes generational. It stops with you, but echoes through them. She rearranged Logan's guest room into a study corner for her daughters. It was filled with books, maps, art supplies. "I want them to dream in color," she said once, smiling. This wasn't about survival anymore, it was about building. And building takes vision. In many stories about people, the turning point comes not when the pain ends, but when you decide to grow anyway. Olivia was planting roots. Sundays became their family day. Pancake breakfasts, park picnics, lazy afternoons with movies. Logan was there, not intruding, just present. The girls started calling him Lo without prompting. It was unspoken, but real. These weren't grand declarations of love, they were consistent acts of loyalty. That's the core of any real story worth telling. Reliability over romance. Presence over promises. Olivia started journaling again, not just for herself, but to leave a record, a written history of falling, rising, and rebuilding. "Maybe one day they'll read this and know their mom was brave," she wrote. That's the heart of motivational story. Not the pain, but the proof that healing is possible. And when you document your growth, you not only honor it, you invite others to believe it's possible for them too. At work, she continued to rise. She was no longer the quiet assistant. She was the one teammates turned to, the one who led with empathy and vision. Logan watched her thrive without interference. That's what makes an impressive story stick. It's not just about success, but how that success uplifts others. Olivia began mentoring a new intern. "You belong here," she told her. Words she never imagined saying just months before. The weight on her chest had lifted, replaced by something lighter: confidence. Not arrogance, not pride, just the deep knowing that she was capable. That's a rare moment in any touching story's journey, when the voice inside you switches from "you can't" to "you did." Olivia began setting goals, financial plans, family vacations, maybe even starting her own consulting brand. Logan encouraged her, quietly fueling her vision. But even in joy, she carried scars. Nights still came with memories. Some dreams still woke her with cold sweats. And yet, she didn't fight them. She welcomed them. Because those memories were proof she had survived. That's what personal overcoming looks like. It's not erasing pain, but learning to live alongside it. Olivia embraced both the shadow and the sunlight. And somehow, that made her shine even brighter. One evening while folding laundry, her youngest daughter asked, "Mommy, are we happy now?" Olivia paused, then smiled. "Yes, baby, we're happy." But as she looked out the window, her heart whispered another truth. She was almost ready. Ready to love again. Ready to choose happiness not just for her children, but for herself. And the man who waited patiently in the next room would soon hear that answer. One quiet evening, as the girls slept and the air was filled with nothing but the hum of a distant radio, Logan finally spoke the words he'd been holding in. "I love you, Olivia." No script, no perfect moment, just honesty. Olivia froze, not in fear, but in shock. For someone who had once felt invisible, being truly seen was overwhelming. But that's the beauty of a love story rooted in real story. It catches you off guard. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face for any trace of pressure or expectation. There was none. Just warmth. Just presence. "I need time," she whispered. Logan smiled gently. "I'll wait." That's the most powerful chapter in any stories about people's journey, not the confession, but the space given after it. Olivia had learned to rebuild. She had reclaimed her dignity, her career, her family history. But love required surrender. And surrender, for someone who had survived so much, wasn't easy. Still, she let herself lean into the connection. Slowly, carefully. That's how touching stories unfold. Not with declarations, but with quiet moments that whisper, "I trust you." They didn't need big dates or candlelit declarations. Their moments were real grocery store runs, dance parties with the girls, inside jokes about burnt toast. These were the pieces of a surprising story, not written by fantasy, but by choice. Logan never pushed. He simply stayed close. And in that staying, Olivia felt the kind of love she had always believed only existed for other people. She found herself opening up more, about old dreams, about fears, about the time she almost gave up completely. Logan didn't try to fix anything, he just held space. That's when a true story transforms into a moving story, when pain is not edited out, but honored. Olivia realized love didn't mean forgetting her past, it meant letting someone walk beside her through it. One night, as they tucked the girls into bed, Logan kissed Olivia's forehead. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she smiled. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "Me too," he said. That moment said more than any vow. In real-life histories that matter, love isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to stay, even when fear exists. And they were both choosing, every single day. Her daughters saw it too, not just in gestures but in energy. The house felt lighter, the mornings warmer, the laughter more honest. Olivia was no longer just surviving, she was living, thriving, and more than anything, loving, not out of desperation, but abundance. That's what a motivational story rooted in personal overcoming always leads to, the ability to love without losing yourself. Still, life has a way of testing the very things we value most. And just when everything seemed steady, a message arrived, cryptic, suspicious, threatening the very foundation of trust Olivia had built. And in the next chapter, she'd find out just how strong that foundation really was. It came in the form of a message, anonymous, short, unsettling. "He's hiding something. Ask him about Camille." Olivia stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. Trust isn't something you build overnight. And when you've rebuilt your entire life story around safety and honesty, even a whisper of doubt can feel like a thunderstorm. She didn't confront Logan immediately. Instead, she watched, listened, observed. That's the thing about touching real story, it's never free from conflict, especially when the past tries to claw its way back into your peace. Olivia had spent so long learning to trust herself, and now she was being asked to trust someone else. Again. Her heart ached with the weight of the unknown. She didn't want drama, she wanted clarity. Because in stories about people, clarity is more healing than apology. She pulled away emotionally, just slightly. Logan noticed. "Something's wrong," he said one evening. Olivia hesitated, then showed him the message. He read it, exhaled, and nodded. "I've been meaning to tell you about her," he said. "No panic, no excuses, just truth. That's the hallmark of a real-life story's hero, not perfection, but responsibility." Logan wasn't hiding. He was waiting for the right moment. Camille, it turned out, was a former employee who had once tried to cross lines, both professionally and personally. Logan had rejected her advances, and she'd been terminated for unrelated ethical violations. Bitter, she'd made it her mission to plant seeds of doubt. "I thought ignoring her would be better than feeding her drama," Logan admitted. "But I should have told you. I'm sorry." Olivia nodded. This was not betrayal. This was humanity. She asked for proof emails, HR records, texts. Logan didn't hesitate. He provided everything. That transparency, that immediate vulnerability made all the difference. That's what separates an impressive story from one that collapses under pressure, evidence backed by integrity. Olivia's heart steadied. The trust wasn't broken, it had just been tested. And it passed. Later that night, as they sat in silence, Logan asked, "Do you still trust me?" Olivia looked into his eyes, not for the first time, but perhaps in a new way. "Yes," she said. "But not just because of what you showed me, because of how you showed up. That's the core of any touching story's journey, being present when it matters most." Logan had chosen honesty over pride, vulnerability over defense. Their bond, now tempered by truth, felt stronger. Olivia wasn't naive. She knew life would bring more tests, but she no longer feared them. Because trust, when earned through action, is resilient. In motivational story after motivational story, you'll find this truth. Love without trust is noise. Love with trust, it's a melody. And Olivia was ready to play it forward. The message didn't break them, it revealed them. And what Olivia saw wasn't a man with secrets, but a man with the courage to face them. Their story had already passed through despair, shame, and rebirth. But now it was beginning something even rarer, a future, where love and truth could finally live in the same home. Not every story starts in a palace, and not every hero wears a cape. Sometimes, the greatest transformations come from those we least expect, like a man kneeling in front of the woman the world gave up on. Logan and Olivia's journey wasn't perfect. It was real. It was raw. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Because in a world where people judge you by what you have, this story reminds us of the power of who you are. So now, ask yourself, who would you kneel for? Would you have stopped that day or just kept walking? And more importantly, what second chance in your life are you still afraid to take? You've just seen a touching real story about love, dignity, and rebuilding from zero. But here's the truth. This could be your story too. Let this be your sign. To forgive, to start over, to believe that broken doesn't mean finished. And if this story moved something in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep learning with us. Because out there, in the messiness of people's lives, the most inspiring story of all might still be waiting for you to write it.